Why? The avoidant will always come back when they've gone quiet. You've been ghosted, they've gone silent, you're sitting there wondering, what did I do? Why are they gone? Did I say too much? Not enough? Let me stop you right there. This isn't about you being too much. This is about them running from what they're not ready to face. See, avoidant people don't leave because there's no connection. They leave because the connection feels dangerous to them. Not because you're toxic, but because real intimacy is unfamiliar, unsafe. It threatens the control they've worked their whole life to maintain. Now listen, when someone goes quiet, your instinct might be to chase, to over-explain, to prove your worth. But let me give you a truth that will set you free. Silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's reflection. Sometimes, here's the thing, it's when avoidants retreat, it's not permanent. It's their pattern. They pull back to feel safe, to regulate, to get back in control. And when the intensity dies down, when you stop reaching out, stop pushing, they start wondering, they start feeling. And that is when they come back. Not because you begged, not because you convinced, but because your stillness reminded them of what they're afraid to lose. Let me say that again. Your power is in your stillness. Your strength is in not chasing. You see, they come back not because you shouted louder, but because your silence echoed the truth they tried to run from. Avoidants don't leave because there's no connection. They leave because there is one. And that's what terrifies them the most. It's easy to think that when someone pulls away, it means they don't care. They didn't feel anything real. But for someone with avoidant tendencies, real connection is exactly what triggers the fear. It stirs up parts of them that have been locked away for years, sometimes since childhood. You see, many avoidant people learned early on that closeness meant danger. Vulnerability wasn't met with safety. It was met with rejection, criticism, or abandonment. So they built walls not because they wanted to hurt anyone, but because it was the only way to protect themselves. These walls become their default operating system. Independence, self-sufficiency, emotional distance, it all becomes armor. Not because they don't crave love, but because love feels too risky, too unpredictable, too much like losing control. So when they start to get close to someone, when emotional intimacy starts to surface, their nervous system reads it like a threat. It's not logical. It's wired deep in the subconscious. And so they retreat. They go quiet. They disappear. And here's the twist. It's usually not about the person they're pulling away from. It's about what that person represents. Emotional availability, intimacy, the possibility of being seen. For someone who's wired to avoid those things, even the idea of being vulnerable can send them running. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you did something right. You got close. Too close for their comfort. And instead of leaning in, they pull back. This is where a lot of people get stuck. They think if they left, it must mean they didn't care. But with avoidance, it's often the opposite. The stronger the connection, the greater the fear. They're not running from you. They're running from themselves, from the part of them that starts to open, that starts to soften, that starts to hope. Because hope for an avoidant is terrifying. It means there's something to lose. So they disappear. They go quiet. They convince themselves they're better off alone. They rationalize that you were too much, too intense, too needy. Because it's easier than admitting the truth that you touch something inside them they weren't ready to feel, that you cracked the surface. And that's why it's so important not to personalize their disappearance. It feels personal, of course. It hurts. It's confusing. But most of the time, it has far more to do with their inner world than anything you did. Avoidants are in a battle between what they deeply crave and what they're deathly afraid of. Connection pulls them in, fear pushes them out. And they're constantly swinging between those two poles. But if you understand this, you stop chasing. You stop blaming yourself. You start to see that they're quiet doesn't mean you were unworthy. It means you're getting close to something real. And for them, real is scary. So when they go quiet, remember this. Their silence isn't always a sign of detachment. Sometimes it's the sound of someone fighting a war inside themselves. War between the version of them that wants to be loved and the version of them that learned love meant pain. They didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because the connection started to expose everything they haven't healed. Silence can feel like the deepest kind of pain when someone you care about suddenly pulls away. You check your phone over and over. You replay the last conversation in your head, searching for a sign, a moment, a misstep that might explain their withdrawal. But here's what most people don't realize. When an avoiding partner goes quiet, it's rarely about rejection. It's rarely about you. It's about their own emotional overload. Their nervous system is trying to regulate, and silence is the only way they know how to feel safe again. Avoidants have a different blueprint for handling emotions. While some people lean into intimacy and connection for comfort, avoidants do the opposite. The more intense things get emotionally, the more they feel the need to retreat. Not because they don't feel. Often they feel a lot, but their conditioning has taught them that expressing or dealing with those emotions is unsafe, unproductive, or overwhelming. So instead of confronting them or communicating openly, they shut down. They disappear. They go inward. This kind of silence isn't apathy. It's not cruelty. It's a coping strategy that they developed long before they met you. In the face of emotional intensity, they default to self-preservation. Their mind tells them, get away, regain control, shut down before you get hurt. So when the connection gets deep, when conflict arises, or even when they sense your expectations are rising, their system interprets it as a threat. Even if you're approaching with love, it's important to understand that avoidant silence is often rooted in fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being seen in a way they don't fully understand themselves. They didn't grow up feeling emotionally safe, so as adults, their brains are wired to treat intimacy as danger. When they pull away, they're not necessarily trying to punish you. They're trying to survive emotionally in a moment that feels too big, too heavy, too close. This is why chasing them doesn't work. Your attempts to reconnect, though genuine and loving, can feel like pressure to someone who's already emotionally maxed out. It reinforces their need to distance themselves. They're not rejecting you. They're trying to regain their balance. They need space to decompress, to recalibrate, to make sense of their own emotions before they can even think about connecting again. Ironically, it's your stillness, not your pursuit, that helps them feel safe. When you stop reacting to the silence with anxiety or desperation, you change the pattern. You signal that you're not going to smother them, that you're not going to demand emotional access when they're overwhelmed. More than anything, opens the door for reconnection later. And while it's easy to take their silence as a sign that you weren't enough, that's almost never the case. They're quiet doesn't mean they've stopped caring. In fact, the very intensity of their withdrawal can reflect the depth of what they were starting to feel. They may not have the tools to handle it, but that doesn't mean they weren't affected by the connection. Their silence might be a way to process emotions they haven't allowed themselves to feel in years. Understanding this doesn't make it hurt less, but it does give you clarity. It helps you detach from the idea that their disappearance is your fault. It reminds you that not everyone is equipped to handle intimacy, even when they crave it. Silence, in the world of the avoidant, is more often a defense mechanism than a statement of how they truly feel. They're not rejecting you. They're protecting themselves from you, yes, but more importantly, from their own feelings. When someone you care about goes silent, the instinct to chase them can feel almost irresistible. It comes from a place of fear and longing, fear of losing the connection, fear that you did something wrong, and a deep desire to fix it. But when you chase an avoidant during their withdrawal, you're not bringing them closer. You're actually pushing them further away. Not because you're wrong for wanting clarity or connection, but because chasing disrupts the one thing the avoidant is trying to protect above all else, their emotional autonomy. Avoidants need space to feel safe. They've built their sense of control around emotional distance. It's not that they don't feel deeply, they often do. But vulnerability feels like a threat to their inner stability. When things get intense, when emotional needs arise, or when someone gets too close, their nervous system kicks into flight mode. Their mind says, get out, shut down, hide. And in that moment, any pressure to engage, no matter how well-intentioned, feels like an attack on their personal boundaries. So when you're chasing, message after message, pouring out your feelings, asking for answers, trying to reconnect, you're unknowingly reinforcing their need to pull away. You might think you're being vulnerable and loving, and you are, but they perceive it as emotional demand. And that demand, even when it's wrapped in kindness, becomes overwhelming. Their system interprets it as suffocating, even if all you're asking for is reassurance or a simple explanation. The truth is, chasing isn't about love. It's about trying to regulate your own anxiety through someone else's response. It's understandable. We all want to feel seen, heard, and understood. But with an avoidant, the more you push, the more they retreat. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. They pull away, you chase, they feel smothered, they shut down even harder, and you end up feeling more confused and hurt than before. To break this cycle, you have to step back. Not as a game, not as manipulation, but as a form of self-respect and emotional wisdom. Letting someone go quiet doesn't mean you're okay with being ignored or mistreated. It means you're choosing not to engage in a dynamic that doesn't serve you or them. You're giving them the space they clearly need while also giving yourself the dignity of not begging for breadcrumbs. When you stop chasing, something powerful happens. The energy shifts. You reclaim your own emotional center. You stop waiting on the response to validate your worth. You remember that you are whole and lovable, even in silence. And ironically, it's this energy, this grounded, detached strength that often draws the avoidant back in, not because you manipulated them, but because they finally feel safe enough to re-engage. You gave them space to reset, and you didn't flood them with more emotional stimuli when they were already on edge. This doesn't mean you suppress your needs or stay quiet forever, but it does mean learning the timing. With avoidance, emotional conversations need to happen when they're regulated, not when they're in flight mode. So instead of chasing, you observe, you pause, you wait for the emotional storm to pass before trying to reconnect. And if they never come back, that tells you something too. Not about your worth, but about their capacity. Chasing might feel like love, but it's often fear dressed in urgency. Real love knows when to reach out and when to step back. It knows that forcing connection never leads to intimacy. That the avoidance space is not only respectful, it's essential. You're not abandoning them by pulling back. You're choosing peace over panic. You're choosing self-trust over emotional chaos. And that choice changes everything. Real strength doesn't always look like bold action. Sometimes it looks like holding back when every cell in your body is screaming to reach out. And someone you love goes quiet, especially someone with avoidant tendencies. Your instinct might be to fight for the connection, to speak louder, to pour out your feelings. But in that moment, true power is not found in chasing, it's found in your stillness, in your ability to stand grounded, centered, and calm, even when you're surrounded by uncertainty. Emotional stillness is not indifferent. It's not pretending you don't care. It's choosing to respond instead of react. It's the pause between the impulse to fix and the decision to let go. When you're emotionally still, you're not cutting someone off. You're creating space for them and for yourself. You're refusing to let your nervous system be hijacked by their distance. You're not mirroring their silence out of spite. You're holding your own peace, refusing to spin into chaos to try to earn connection. Avoidant individuals often need space to process emotions, especially when intimacy starts to feel overwhelming. When you come at them with heightened emotion, even if it's well-intentioned, it can trigger their defense mechanisms. They may interpret your intensity as pressure, your honesty as confrontation, your vulnerability as a threat to their independence. They're not wired to move toward closeness under pressure. They move away. I see that's you. Why I'm not here to control you. I'm not here to smother you. I'm standing in my own energy, and I trust myself enough not to chase. Stillness gives both people a chance to regulate. It allows emotions to settle and perspective to return. When you resist the urge to react, you create room for clarity. You get to ask yourself, am I reaching out because I want to connect or because I can't sit with the discomfort of the silence? Emotional stillness doesn't mean you're passive. It means you're rooted. You're not abandoning yourself to secure someone else's attention. And here's what's even more important. When you hold your stillness, you shift the dynamic. You move from being reactive to being intentional. You're no longer handing over your emotional well-being to someone else's. Presence or absence. That's a massive energetic shift, and the avoidant feels it. Maybe not consciously, but something in them notices. The pressure is gone. The emotional charge is neutralized. And in that space, they may finally feel safe enough to come forward again. Because paradoxically, avoidants are often drawn to emotional safety, but not the kind that demands from them. They're drawn to the kind of grounded presence that doesn't need constant reassurance. Means that the kind of, and you stop trying to pull them in, they feel free to explore the connection on their terms. They're more likely to return when they sense that the relationship isn't built on pressure or panic, but on mutual respect and emotional maturity. It's not easy to stay still in the face of silence. You're saying, I'm not going to abandon myself. It takes emotional on to someone else. But it's also a declaration is magnetic. Not because it plays games, but because it's real, it's rooted. And in a world full of emotional reactivity, that kind of grounded presence stands out like a lighthouse in a storm. So while others might try to speak louder or push harder, your quiet confidence becomes the most powerful response. Not because you don't care, but because you've learned that peace is more valuable than panic, and that your energy is too sacred to be spent chasing someone who needs space to figure themselves out. When you stop reaching, stop explaining, and stop trying to fix the silence, something interesting happens. The space you create becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the avoidant individual starts see themselves more clearly. Not because you forced them to, not because you pushed, but because your stillness becomes a reflection of something they can't avoid any longer. Their own patterns, their own fears, their own unfinished emotional business. Avoidants are not emotionally numb. They are emotionally guarded. And those guards don't come from nowhere. They're usually built out of survival, often from childhood experiences where vulnerability was punished, ignored, or misunderstood. So they learn to manage closeness by controlling distance. They learn to keep one foot out the door, not because they wanted to hurt others, but because they never learned what it feels like to be emotionally safe when things get real. When you get close to someone like this, when you show up with love, honesty, and emotional presence, you begin to challenge that internal programming. At first, they might welcome it. They might even crave it. But as the connection deepens, so does the fear. And for someone who has been avoiding their emotions for a long time, fear can be overwhelming. That's when the retreat happens. That's when the silence comes. Now, here's where most people go wrong. They assume their job is to fix it, to show up louder, to explain more, to try harder to prove that they're safe, loving, and trustworthy. But the truth is, nothing you say or do can override someone's internal wiring if they're not ready to confront it. And the more you try, the more their system feels threatened, not by you, but by the intensity of being seen. So instead of continuing to pour into a space that's not ready to receive, you step back, not in anger, not a bitterness, but in quiet strength. And in that stillness, a powerful thing starts to happen. The avoidant person who is so used to looking outward for escape is now left with only themselves. No noise, no distractions, just the echo of their own choices. And that silence becomes louder than any words you could have said. When you no longer give them something to react to, they begin to reflect. When you're not chasing, defending, or trying to draw them back in, their focus can no longer be on you. It turns inward. They start to feel what they were avoiding, the emotional pull they tried to outrun. The connection they pretended didn't affect them. The absence of your energy, once taken for granted, becomes impossible to ignore. And maybe for the first time, they see themselves not through the lens of survival, but through the contrast of your absence. They remember how it felt to be met with emotional safety. They recall how you didn't demand but invited, how you didn't control but allowed. And all of that lands differently when you're no longer trying to convince them of your value. And this is how your stillness becomes transformational, not just for you, but for them. It's not passive, it's not giving up, it's a conscious choice to stop managing someone else's discomfort and start protecting your own peace. And ironically, it's often that very choice that opens the door for healing. Because when an avoidant person finally starts to confront themselves, it's rarely during the noise. It's almost always in the quiet aftermath of your retreat. Your presence was a gift, but your stillness, that's the wake-up call. It reflects back everything they've been unwilling to see. It holds up the truth like a mirror, not to shame them, but to show them what's possible if they ever decide to grow. You're not punishing them by stepping back. You're giving them the rare opportunity to face their reflection without the buffer of your effort. And for some, that moment of clarity can be the beginning of everything. When the avoidant returns, it's rarely with fireworks or big declarations. More often, it's subtle. A text out of the blue, a comment on your story, a quiet reach, like someone testing the temperature of the water before diving in. It might seem random, even confusing, but make no mistake, it's not by accident. When the avoidant circles back, it's because the connection meant something. And while they may not have the emotional vocabulary to explain it, their actions tell you what their words often won't. Avoidants don't come back because they've suddenly become a new person overnight. They come back because the stillness, the distance, and the absence of your presence stirred something in them. That space you created, it wasn't empty. It was full of all the emotions they tried to escape. Memories, moments, warmth, safety, laughter, even pain. And when those feelings resurface without your direct involvement, it creates a powerful contrast. The very thing they ran from becomes the thing they start to miss. But coming back isn't easy for someone who has spent their life running from emotion. They wrestle with themselves before reaching out. There's pride, fear, uncertainty. Will you respond with anger? Will you shut them out? Will you expect explanations they're not yet ready to give? These questions swirl in their mind, but something deeper pushes through. The imprint you left behind. You didn't chase, you didn't beg, you didn't try to force a connection that couldn't stand on its own. That energy sticks with them. It doesn't just disappear. Avoidants often need time to process feelings. Others handle in real time. What might take you a day to understand emotionally could take them weeks or even months. Their emotional processing is like a delayed reaction. At first, they feel overwhelmed by the closeness. Then after pulling away, they slowly realize what the connection meant. And because they don't live in constant emotional awareness, that realization sneaks up on them. Maybe it's a quiet night alone. Maybe it's seeing something that reminds them of you. Whatever the trigger, it opens the door just enough for them to consider reconnecting. What's important to understand is that their return doesn't always come with closure or clarity. In fact, it might raise more questions than it answers. They might not even fully understand why they left or why they're back. But underneath the surface, what's driving them is the emotional footprint you left, the calm, the warmth, the sense of being accepted without pressure. You were the calm in the storm. You didn't try to control them. You allowed them space, and in doing so, you became a safe place in a world that's often emotionally overwhelming. This is why they come back. Not because they want to hurt you, not because they want to play games, but because for perhaps the first time in a long time, someone made them feel something real. That feeling doesn't vanish, even if they try to push it down. And once the fear recedes and the noise dies down, that truth remains. It hums underneath everything, whispering, go back. But the return isn't the end of the story. It's a moment of possibility. It can open the door to reconnection, yes, but only if both people are willing to grow, because the same pattern will repeat if nothing changes. Still, the return shows that the connection mattered. It shows that your energy wasn't invisible. It touched something in them they couldn't ignore forever. And for someone who spent a lifetime avoiding emotion, that alone is powerful. That alone is rare. You didn't need to convince them. You didn't need to plead. You just needed to be who you were, authentic, present, and willing to let go when it was time. That's what they remember. That's why they come back. Absolutely. Here's a powerful conclusion and a heartfelt thank you / goodbye note that ties your entire speech together in the same style and emotional tone. And so, if there's one truth I want you to walk away with, it's this. You don't have to chase love to keep it. You don't have to beg someone to see your worth. When someone pulls away, especially someone with avoidant tendencies, it's not always a reflection of your value. It's often a reflection of their own internal battles. Their silence isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just a pause in a deeper emotional process that even they don't fully understand yet. But your role in that story isn't to fix them. It's not to abandon yourself, trying to hold them together. Your role is to hold your ground, protect your peace, and know the power of your own stillness. Because real love doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't sacrifice dignity for temporary connection. Real love knows when to lean in and when to let go with grace. And yes, avoidance often come back. Not because you chased, but because your energy left an imprint, because your presence was